Voyage to go, history. Life is a journey, being part of it is everything. Hello, my name is Jessica. Welcome to episode 34 of my historical travel podcast, Voyage to go, history, where I take you on the most adventurous journeys from the past that continue to shape our view of the world today. In the true story I'm currently telling you, 17-year-old German Georg Forster travels around the world with his father, a naturalist in the 18th century, aboard a sailing ship under the command of James Cook. Georg's travel narrative is written in the language of the 18th century. To make it easier to understand, I have largely translated it into modern English. Forster's knowledge reflects the second half of the 18th century, so in the Voyage to Go history podcast, I will occasionally provide additional information and context. What happened in the last episode?
The last episode marked the temporary end of the tropical chapter of the voyage. After a rewarding stay on Tonga Tapu, the Resolution set sail, heading south, back to New Zealand. The warm days of ease and exchange gave way to colder winds, stormy seas, and renewed hardship. As they approached the east coast of New Zealand's North Island, the ship passed Portland Island and Hawke's Bay. The crew spotted steep white cliffs and fortified Maori settlements perched along the heights. Eventually, 3 canoes arrived, and a high-ranking Maori boarded the Resolution. A ceremonial gift was exchanged, and in return, the crew offered tools, pigs, and chickens. Mahane added tropical yams from his personal supply, though their value in this colder climate remained uncertain. Before departing, the Maori performed a powerful war dance, marked by rhythmic stomping, shouts, and fierce gestures. It left a strong impression. Meanwhile, the wind shifted, and a violent storm set in. The Resolution was forced to tack along the coast as rain poured and sails tore. The crew faced a bitter cold, just 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and endured sleepless nights as the voyage entered a harsher and more dangerous phase.
Sunday, October 24th, 1773, Cook Strait, New Zealand.
Today, they finally sighted the entrance to Cook Strait, specifically Cape Palliser, but did not dare to enter in the dark. Before they could attempt it the next morning, the storm rose again. By 9 a.m., it had grown so fierce that they had to heave to and reduce all sails except one.
The Cook Strait is the narrow body of water that separates New Zealand's 2 main islands, the North Island and the South Island. It connects the Tasman Sea in the west with the South Pacific Ocean in the east and is named after the British explorer James Cook, who first sailed through it in 1770 during his first voyage to the Pacific. Before Cook's exploration, it was unclear whether New Zealand was one island or several. When he successfully navigated the strait aboard the Endeavour, he confirmed that the landmass was divided, and his detailed mapping helped establish the modern understanding of New Zealand's geography. The strait is about 22 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, but it's known for its difficult navigation. Strong tidal currents, unpredictable winds, and rapidly changing weather conditions make it one of the most challenging stretches of water in the southern hemisphere. Even today, ferry crossings between Wellington and Picton are sometimes delayed or cancelled due to rough seas. What makes the Cook Strait particularly significant is its strategic and cultural role in New Zealand. It is a vital transport link, a site of early Māori navigation and settlement, and a place of remarkable natural beauty. The strait also highlights the complex and dynamic relationship between land, sea, and people in New Zealand's history.
Although they remained close to the coast, where the high mountains were supposed to offer shelter, the waves still rolled in from afar and rose so threateningly high that when they broke, the storm scattered them into fine mist. This watery haze spread across the entire surface of the sea, and since there was not a single cloud in the sky, indeed the sun shone brightly and clearly, the foaming ocean offered an exceedingly dazzling sight. Eventually, the wind became so violent that it tore apart the last sail they had dared to keep set. Now, they were entirely at the mercy of the waves, which hurled the vessel back and forth, often crashing over the deck with such force that they smashed anything in their path. The constant pitching and rolling severely strained the rigging, and even the ropes that secured crates and chests gave way and snapped, leaving everything around them in utter disarray. At one point, as the ship lurched especially hard, the gun chest, fastened on the stern deck, broke loose and slammed into the railing, where their young companion Mr. Hood happened to be leaning. He barely had time to duck, but even that would not have saved him had the chest not struck the railing at an angle, creating a hollow space in which Hood, by sheer luck, remained unharmed. As fierce as the storm was, it had not entirely driven off the birds. A black petrel still hovered here and there above the turbulent sea, skillfully seeking refuge behind the towering waves. The sight of the ocean was both magnificent and terrifying. At one moment, from atop a massive wave, they could see a vast seascape torn into countless deep trenches. The next, a crashing breaker plunged them into a steep valley, while the wind from the opposite direction already drove a new wall of water toward them, threatening to engulf the ship. As night approached, fear grew, especially among those not accustomed from youth to life at sea. In the captain's cabin, the windows had been removed and replaced with wooden shutters to keep the waves from crashing in. This change revealed a scorpion hiding within the window frame, likely brought aboard from one of the last islands, hidden among a bundle of fruits or roots. Maheen assured them the creature was harmless, but its mere appearance was enough to strike fear into their hearts. In the other cabins, all the beds were soaked, yet even if they had remained dry, the deafening roar of the waves, the creaking of the wood, and the violent rocking of the ship would have destroyed any hope of sleep. To complete their horror, they also had to endure the dreadful swearing and cursing of the sailors, so loud that it often drowned out wind and water alike. Accustomed to danger from youth, the seamen were undeterred and hurled the most outrageous blasphemies, cursing every part of the human body with such strange and varied expressions that it defied description. Meanwhile, the storm raged on until, at 2 a.m., the wind suddenly ceased, plunging them into absolute calm. Now the waves tossed the ship even more violently. It rocked from side to side so severely that at times the middle walls and even parts of the rear deck dipped into the sea. The next morning, more islanders arrived in even greater numbers than the day before, paddling their canoes toward the ship. Among the newcomers was the chief Teiratuh, whom they had met on a previous visit and who had once welcomed them with a lengthy speech. Now, however, he appeared in humble condition, nearly unkempt. Gone were the elaborately woven mats trimmed with dog fur. He was plainly dressed, and his hair was loosely tied in a single braid, uncombed and without oil. The former orator and chief now seemed to have fallen to the level of a mere fish vendor. At first they didn't recognize him, but once his face became familiar again, they showed him proper respect. He was invited into the cabin, where they presented him with a few nails. The iron tools and Tahitian cloth aboard were of such high value to Teiratuh and his companions that they promptly set up camp nearby, likely to remain close for trading, but perhaps also to seize other opportunities. The ship anchored close to shore, near the spot designated for filling water casks. There, tents had already been erected for the water crew, the woodcutters, and the astronomers' observatory. Each morning and afternoon, they made landfall, though they had to force their way through tangled vines that stretched from tree to tree. Mahane or Ohedidi often accompanied the explorers through the dense forest, marveling at the many bird species, their songs, and their vivid feathers. In one of the gardens, where radishes and turnips were in full bloom, many small birds gathered to sip nectar from the flowers, sometimes tearing them straight from the stems. They shot a few of these birds, and to everyone's surprise, Mahine, who had never fired a gun in his life, brought one down with his very first shot. It proved once again that people in partially civilized societies often possess keener senses than those dulled by the comforts and habits of so-called modern life. In Tahiti, it was common for locals to spot tiny birds in dense branches, or ducks hidden deep within thick reeds, creatures that none of the Europeans could even see. The warm and pleasant weather favored their zoological studies so much that even on their very first excursion, they managed to bring a large number of birds back aboard. But before they could return to land the next morning, word arrived from the shore camp. The locals had stolen a cloak and a bag of linen from the water tent during the night. Since the bay where the islanders were staying was separated from their water site by only a hill, the captain immediately walked over and confronted Teiratuh about the theft. The former chief had the stolen items retrieved and returned them without objection, insisting he knew nothing about the incident and had certainly played no part in it himself. Their crew accepted this explanation, choosing not to press the matter further, as the benefits of peaceful relations far outweighed the inconvenience. The New Zealanders provided them daily with fresh fish in exchange for small amounts of Tahitian cloth, something the sailors could neither catch as easily nor in such abundance on their own. During this incident, they also came across one of the pigs that Captain Furneaux had left behind at Cannibal Cove. When asked about the other two, Teiratuh pointed to different areas of the bay, suggesting they had been taken to various places. By dividing the animals among themselves as spoils, the locals had unintentionally prevented their reproduction. Focused solely on immediate needs, they overlooked the long-term advantages these animals could have brought, advantages that might have greatly improved their well-being. On the afternoon of November 6th, numerous locals from different parts of the bay arrived bearing fish, garments, weapons, and similar goods, which they traded for Tahitian cloth. That evening, they retreated to a cove opposite the ship, pulled their canoes ashore, built huts, lit fires, and prepared a fish supper. By the following morning, however, they had all vanished, including those in Ship Cove. At first, the sudden departure puzzled the crew, but it soon became clear that the locals had stolen 6 small casks from the watering site, likely for the iron hoops. In truth, the theft had been unnecessary. Had they stayed just one more day and continued supplying fish, they would have received 3 or 4 times as much useful iron in return. Yet, as they had often observed, New Zealanders rarely concerned themselves with long-term thinking. They preferred whatever was immediate and certain over what was uncertain and delayed. More than the loss itself, it was the locals' departure that impacted the crew. Now they were left to fish on their own, without knowing the fishing spots or the migratory habits of local species, and they could hardly spare their men for this task. The sailors were already stretched thin, scrubbing the ship, sealing leaks, rigging new ropes, and preparing everything for the arduous voyage toward the South Pole. Some of the crew remained ashore to refill water casks, cut wood, and inspect the ship's hardtack, which had deteriorated badly. Unfortunately, it had been packed back in England into new or green barrels, causing the biscuits to turn damp, moldy, and partially rotten. To contain the issue, they brought all the bread ashore, separated the spoiled portions from the salvageable ones, and dried the good stock in an oven. The weather remained as stormy and unsettled as it had been upon their arrival at the coast. Hardly a day passed without violent gusts of wind and showers, descending from the mountains with doubled force and frequently halting their work. The air was cold and harsh. Plant growth progressed slowly, and birds were seen only in sheltered valleys where they could escape the chilly southern winds. This kind of weather appeared to persist throughout the entire winter and well into summer, with no noticeable drop in temperature during winter or rise in summer. Overall, Georg concluded that islands far removed from large landmasses must have relatively constant air temperatures, likely due to the nature of the sea itself. Observations made at Port Egmont in the Falkland Islands had shown that the greatest annual variation between warmth and cold was no more than 17 degrees Celsius. That port lies at 51 degrees and 25 minutes south, while Ship Cove in Queen Charlotte Sound lies at only 41 degrees and 5 minutes. Given this considerable difference, New Zealand's climate should theoretically be milder than that of the Falklands. Yet if Georg's theory about island temperatures held true, it would apply across all latitudes. Furthermore, the actual contrast between the climates of New Zealand and the Falklands might be less than expected. After all, New Zealand's mountains are very high and partially snow-covered year-round, a factor well known to cool the surrounding air. He therefore would not be surprised if it were nearly as cold here as in the Falkland Islands, despite the latter being 10 degrees closer to the pole but much flatter.
Georg Forster observed that New Zealand's climate remained surprisingly cold and stormy year-round, even though it lies much farther north than the Falkland Islands, which have only minor seasonal variation. Drawing from these experiences, Forster develops a hypothesis. Oceanic islands, far from large continental landmasses, tend to have moderate and stable climates, with smaller seasonal fluctuations. This idea anticipates the modern understanding of maritime climate, in which large bodies of water act as thermal buffers. Oceans absorb heat slowly and release it gradually, resulting in relatively consistent air temperatures throughout the year. In contrast, continental regions typically show more extreme temperature shifts between seasons. Forster's insight is particularly advanced for his time. He also acknowledges that local topography, such as the high, partially snow-covered mountains of New Zealand, can have a strong cooling effect on the surrounding environment. This helps explain why New Zealand, though closer to the equator than the Falklands, may feel similarly cold. His observations combine empirical data with broader climatological reasoning, laying an early foundation for comparative geography and climate science.
Despite the harsh weather, the locals remained undeterred and continued moving about the vast sound. After 3 days of absence, a group returned to the anchorage on November 9th in 3 canoes. One of the boats had an ornately carved stern with openwork decorations. After trading some items, they went ashore opposite the ship. The following day, 2 more canoes joined them, including their old friend Tauahangha and his entire family. As a familiar guest, Tauahangha did not hesitate to board. He brought his son Kwa and daughter Kopari with him. The visitors sold green nephrite stones, which had been shaped into chisels and axes. Captain Cook welcomed them into his cabin, gave Tauahangha several gifts, and presented the boy with a shirt. No sooner had Kwa been dressed in the new garment than he became overwhelmed with joy. He could no longer be kept in the cabin with mere kind words. Eager to show off his outfit, he ran to the deck. His delight, however, came at a price. A large goat, freely roaming on deck and feared by the New Zealanders, took offense at the boy's awkward figure in the oversized shirt. Kwa strutted proudly, unaware of the danger. The goat charged him, reared up, and knocked the child to the floor with force. Kwa lay sprawled on the planks, too frightened or too worried about tearing his shirt to get up. He simply screamed, which enraged the goat even further. It prepared to strike again, a blow that might have silenced the boy for good had the crew not intervened in time. They lifted him up, but now his shirt, face, and hands were soiled. He returned to the cabin sobbing and reported the attack to his father. Instead of sympathy, Tauahangha responded with irritation and punished the boy with a few angry blows until the crew calmed them both. The shirt was cleaned, and Kwa received a thorough washing, perhaps the first in his life. Peace was restored. Tauahanga, cautious of another incident, folded the shirt carefully, placed his own garment with it, and bundled all the gifts given to him and his son for safekeeping. That day and the next, though rainy, the islanders continued trading, selling their goods and fish. On the morning of the 12th, as the weather cleared, Georg, Dr. Sparman, and his father set out for Indian Cove. Finding no locals there, they followed a narrow path that led through the forest and up a steep mountain. The track seemed to exist solely because of the abundant ferns whose roots the New Zealanders used for food. In the lower, steeper sections, they had built steps from slate. Higher up, the group had to fight their way through a tangled mess of intertwining vines. The mountain's southern slope was completely forested, while the other sides had trees only halfway up. Beyond the tree line, there were shrubs and ferns, although from the ship the mountain appeared barren and bare. At the summit, they found various plants that, in Dusky Bay, only grew in valleys and along the coast, an indication of how much harsher the climate was in this part of New Zealand. The entire mountain consisted of talc stone, which was common in the area, and once hardened, weathered into flaky layers when exposed to the elements. The stones were whitish, gray, and sometimes streaked with yellow-red iron veins. From the top, they enjoyed a magnificent view. East Bay lay at their feet like a small fish pond, and beyond the strait, they could see all the way to Cape Teiratuh. To the south stretched a rugged, wild landscape, nothing but tall, snow-covered mountains as far as the eye could see. To mark their visit, they lit a fire and burned some of the brush. The following morning, they visited Long Island, where they found numerous plants and unfamiliar birds. In the eastern forest, they heard petrels calling from their underground burrows, some croaking like frogs, others clucking like hens. They likely belonged to the group known as diving petrels, as all petrel species seem to nest in earth holes. They had found similar blue and silver varieties nesting in such burrows in Dusky Bay. Since the 13th, the weather had been mild and pleasant. The islanders, who had set up their huts opposite the ship, continued to supply them generously with fish. The sailors, meanwhile, carried on their flirtations with the local women, although only one of them was considered attractive and friendly. This girl, Togiri, was given in marriage by her parents to one of the young British companions. The young Englishman had been especially kind, and had shown his affection openly, which even the locals had noticed. Togiri was devoted to him as if he had been a New Zealander himself. She rejected the advances of other sailors and declared herself married. Teiratuh. As much as the Englishman liked her, he never brought her aboard. In truth, there was no space for the many uninvited guests that lived on her clothes and in her hair. He visited her on land during the day and often brought her old, spoiled ship's biscuits, which she and her people enjoyed as a delicacy. Maheen of Bora Bora, their island companion, was accustomed to following every call of nature and had no hesitation in obeying these instincts even in New Zealand. He did realize that the women here were neither as beautiful nor as kind as those from his homeland, yet instinct overruled and suppressed his standards. This was hardly surprising, as even civilized Europeans behaved no differently. In every other respect, his behavior toward the New Zealanders was irreproachable. He often remarked on how much worse off they were compared to the inhabitants of the tropical islands. Whenever he listed the advantages those had over the New Zealanders, he expressed sincere pity. He also showed his compassion in action, sharing yams from his own supply with those they met at Cape Blake. Whenever the captain wanted to cultivate a piece of land, he was always there to help. Though he didn't know the language well enough to converse fluently like Tupaya, he learned it better than anyone else on board, helped by its similarity to his native tongue. Georg and the others, too, now understood the dialect of the New Zealanders much better than before, after their time on the tropical islands. It closely resembled the language of the Friendly Islands, from which they had just come. Such small details were important, as they offered clues about the origins of far southern New Zealand's original settlers. On the 22nd, in fine and mild weather, they accompanied the captain to West Bay, where they released 2 sows, 1 boar, 3 roosters, and 2 hens in a remote forest area. The terrain was swampy and seemingly little visited by the islanders, so they hoped the animals would multiply undisturbed, especially since their action had gone unnoticed. Only a single canoe with a few locals had passed at the bay's entrance, likely unaware of their intentions. So if the southern island of New Zealand were ever to be stocked with pigs and chickens, it would be thanks to this cautious operation. Upon returning to the ship, 7 or 8 canoes came rowing from the north, some heading directly to Indian Cove, while the others boarded and offered finely crafted garments and weapons. They were dressed more splendidly than any they had seen in Charlotte Sound so far, with neatly tied-up hair and red-painted cheeks, which matched the warning they had received the day before from the women, that the islanders dressed this way for war. This led Georg to fear that their trade might have rekindled tribal conflicts, since their men had eagerly purchased tools, clothes, and fishhooks, and had pressured the locals to bring more, offering large amounts of Tahitian cloth in return. It was likely the islanders had sought to obtain more goods by raiding their neighbors, as the quantity and quality of weapons, ornaments, and clothing now being offered suggested successful looting, likely not without bloodshed. The next morning they saw the locals eating roots they had prepared earlier, and when Mr. Whitehouse brought some aboard, they found it tasted better than their turnips. Georg's father went ashore with Whitehouse, bought some of the roots, and persuaded 2 locals to lead them into the forest to show the plant they came from. Trusting their honesty, they followed without weapons, and after a long walk, the guide showed them a type of tree fern called mamagu, which produced the edible root, explaining it differed from the similar-looking panga, which was inedible. Both belonged to the fern family, but while mamagu had a pulpy reddish sap in its trunk, resembling sago, the root of the common fern was woody, tasteless, and not nutritious. The locals roasted the mamagu root, crushed it between 2 stones to extract juice, and discarded the fibers, producing a dish that, although rare, was quite decent. When Georg's father returned from the forest with his companions, he witnessed the brutal realities of local life. A boy of about 6 or 7 demanded a piece of roasted penguin from his mother. When she didn't immediately comply, he hurled a large stone at her. She tried to punish him, but her husband sprang forward, threw her to the ground, and beat her mercilessly. According to Georg's crew at the water site, such violent scenes were not uncommon. They had often seen children striking their mothers, while the fathers watched, seemingly to ensure the women didn't fight back. While many so-called savage peoples treated women as laborers, tasked with making clothes, building huts, and cooking, this cruelty in New Zealand appeared even more severe. Boys were raised to despise their mothers, a practice that deeply violated basic principles of decency.
That wraps up episode 34 of Georg Forster's journey around the world about the HMS Resolution with Captain Cook. You'll find a map of the locations we visited in the show notes. To see how these places appear today, head over to my YouTube channel Voyage to Go, where I follow Forster's route and explore its legacy in the modern world. Be sure to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next chapter of this remarkable voyage. Because life is a journey, being part of it is everything.